Recognize the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Tenney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses. I really appreciate drilling down on these numbers. I'm actually a small business owner in upstate New York. Our business is in our 77th year, and we were greatly impacted and have been continually impacted, like all of our friends in business in New York, by unemployment insurance, by the mismanagement of New York through a series of governors here, and I think it's fantastic that the chairman is doing a much-needed look into this and having you gentlemen with your expertise here to do this. And you know, our taxpayers, our employers, our employees have paid the price for this fraud. And I just thought, you know, there's so many numbers being thrown out here, and since you know, one of my favorite authors was Mark Twain, he made a famous statement, who I'm sure all of you in the accounting business knows: there are three kinds of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics. Thank you, Mark Twain, who's buried in New York State, for that. But there are a lot of numbers being thrown around, and I refer initially to the comments from the ranking member about the unemployment, and sometimes these are misleading. There's economic hardship right now in New York State, and you would think that, you know, with 3.7%, that 96.3% of the rest of the country are all working, which we know that's not how the numbers are calculated, so that's why we need to drill into these statistics. But one of the things I wanted to talk about is the recent findings from the GAO, and I'm going to address my first question to you, Mr. Dodaro, is that there was an estimate of fraud of, and you know, you've answered this, 60 billion, with some outside experts going as high as 400 billion. We've heard 180 billion. But the New York fraud alone is estimated at about 11 billion, and that's for fraudulent unemployment benefits since March 2020. In fact, the survey I conducted among my constituents and employers was that countless cases of individuals have received unemployment forms they hadn't requested. They have dealt with these ramifications without having any verification. The payments were made. There was no look back to the employers as to whether these people were actually employed. And many of them were actually my family members who were still gainfully employed. And so many of these problems continue to persist in New York, and I thank you for calling out New York for some of their systems. But on top of that, the New York State has an outstanding trust fund loan of nearly $8 billion, which is yet to repay. Because of this gross mismanagement by the state, taxpayers, small businesses now have to make up that difference. And this has been devastating to especially the smaller employers, especially restaurants forced to close during the pandemic. And after all these hardships for the past several years, I just wonder how it could possibly be fair to now foist this tab for this negligence and incompetence, as you pointed out, on New York taxpayers, on our employers who can really cannot afford to keep this, and so many of them have closed. So I wanted to follow up with you, and how I want to make sure that our federal policies are no longer allowing this reckless behavior by irresponsible governments like New York State, which you keep pointing out. And I know that my colleague from Mr. Higgins mentioned this and alluded to this as well. But my question to you is that, is there a recommendation from the GAO, the Government Accounting Office, issued to the Department of Labor that has not been implemented that would address these concerns? And is there a mechanism to compel New York to prioritize repaying this $8 billion of unemployment insurance loans outside of, say, an automatic increase in the state business taxes, which would make us have even a larger outmigration of people and jobs in our state?
Yeah, well, there's a set of, we have 19 open recommendations to the Department of Labor. 8 of them focus on the fraud areas. There's a set that focus on the need to transform the unemployment insurance program itself to make it more effective. That may go to this issue of incentives of the states. One of the observations I've had over the years is where we're relying on states to administer federal programs, there's often a lot of deferential latitude that the federal government gives the states to implement the programs. There's not a lot of aggressive federal oversight that's needed, and it doesn't really come vividly clear until you have these type of circumstances in place. You know, in good times, we rely on the states to take, you know, to administer these programs and give them a lot of flexibility, but there needs to be a better balance between the federal responsibilities and the states, and the federal government has to have additional responsibilities. Now, the $8 billion, the states are allowed to borrow from the Treasury Department when they run out of money, and then you're right, it has to be paid back by the employers within the state. So that's left to the states' own devices on how they decide to repay that money back to the federal government.
Well, thank you. Can I just clarify one thing? The fraud risk assessment framework, is that what you're talking about with the 19 recommendations?
That's eight of the 19.
Okay.
The other ones go to the need to transform the whole program to make it much more modern, efficient, and meant to deal with our modern economy.
Thank you, and please send that message back to the New York State government now to save our employers. We really appreciate that recommendation. It's 13 years ago now since you made that. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. I would like to point out that your favorite author, Mark Twain, is a good Missourian from the Show Me State who wrote his life about the Mississippi in our congressional district. So